good afternoon, or maybe good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world right now. And welcome to episode 42 of International Expansion Explained. And as you can see, I have James Lever, who was a guest on episode 39 at the end of last year, here with me today. Um, but he's not going to be the one answering questions. So James is going to turn the tables on me, and I am going to be the one answering questions today. So I would just say maybe if somebody who's listening, watching live can drop a comment into the chat, that would help us to know that we are genuinely actually live and not just talking to ourselves here. Otherwise, I will hand it over to James. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Should we wait for a message first? Is that a sensible thing to do?
I
Or
think we can probably just, I think we can just go on and move on
yeah,
with it.
all right,
Sometimes it takes a little bit, there's a little bit of a delay before the messages come in. So,
okay, sure. All right, well, good. Thanks, Catherine. It's your show. Thanks for coming to your show. And yeah, I remember we did that episode 39, and I asked you, has anyone ever interviewed you? And no one has. And you've got a lot of experience and skills and information people want to hear. So this is useful for everyone, I'm sure. I will introduce you and then ask a few questions, if that's all right.
sounds good. It
All
sounds
right. So, welcome, Catherine. Catherine Reed is an international sales and marketing consultant with 30 years' experience developing niche products in emerging markets. She helps small and medium companies to break through international barriers, creating successful entrepreneurs and a thriving global marketplace. Catherine firmly believes that business is done between people and therefore places her focus on building strong relationships that form a solid foundation for doing business. When she's not traveling around the world, Catherine enjoys playing clarinet in her town's wind orchestra or sharing her love of the outdoors with her scout group. Welcome, Catherine, to your show. Perfect.
it's good that I decided to come today, really, isn't it?
Isn't it? Isn't it? That's great. So I'll just kick off with these questions here because there's a lot to get through. We have about an hour planned for this. So the first question, the logical question is, how did you get into international business and how did you arrive at the point you are at today?
I guess the point where it started was me doing a languages degree at university. So I was a linguist at university, French and German, for anybody who's interested. French was my first foreign language, German was my second one. And because of that, I needed to spend a year abroad. And so that's how I kind of landed in Austria. And when I was here, I had a really great year abroad, really enjoyed it. And I was looking for a way that would give me some extra knowledge and an extra step, but at the same time also allow me, after I'd graduated from my bachelor's, to come back to Austria. And I found that the local university had this course in export and international business, which I thought, well, I don't really know anything about it. Let's give it a go. And it would at least help me see whether that's what I was interested in. And so that's kind of how I started out into exports. And back in the UK, I started originally doing export admin, which was quite a soul suck, it has to be said.
It sounds a bit like that, sure.
Yeah, mid-90s, and we still had a typewriter in the office for doing letter of
Wow,
credit
really? Gee.
paperwork. It was only about a year later that we actually got a PC for doing our export paperwork.
Wow. Okay.
Even though I had a PC I had a PC with internet at home, but we didn't have one in the office. Yes. Yeah, and then I guess end of the 90s, I had the opportunity to come back to Austria, which I did. And briefly after that, I started out with a job in international sales. I'd already worked in international sales for about 5 years at that point, and I started out at a baby nutrition company in their exporting arm. And that gave me not just experience in Eastern Europe and like really emerging markets like in Africa and so on that I'd had with my automotive job in the UK, but also let me move into Asia. And then after 18 years working in infant formula, I decided I wanted to be my own boss and went self-employed about 6 months before COVID, which was not the
Great
greatest.
timing, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't the greatest of timings ever, but I am still here and therefore it worked. And so these days I'm working as a consultant together with Deering and Associates, as one of their senior advisors. And I'm helping companies bridge, mostly consumer goods, especially food and beverage, bridge between Europe and the Asian region, and both directions. And that's really good fun, as well as I do a bit of coaching of people who are looking to get into international sales, that kind of thing. So
That's
yeah.
amazing. That's really good. Do you remember the first time you went to Asia as well? Where does that fit in along the timeline?
I guess my first business trip to Asia would have been 2002 or 2003.
Right.
And I visited Taiwan, Vietnam, and Thailand, I think.
Right. Okay. And
So,
obviously that influenced you, that impacted your decision later in life to work closely with Asia.
yeah, I mean, I kind of fell into it because the company I was working for, they had quite a lot of business in Asia, and they'd been kind of putting pins in the map. We need to have a partner here, we need to have a partner there. And they hadn't really been strategically aligned completely. So it all kind of fallen off a bit, and they were back down to just Taiwan and Vietnam. And when the then area manager left the company, my boss was just like, your English is better than ours. You'll understand those Asian accents better than ours, because we really struggled. There's been some misunderstandings that have that have led to lost business. And so that's how it started. And it wasn't a region where I ever would. I mean, I was interested in the region, but it wasn't like, oh, I have to become an Asian specialist, because I'd always been like an Eastern European specialist.
Mm.
And so, but it just clicked.
Yeah.
And then there was a big scandal. Maybe you were in China at the time, I'm not sure, 2008.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, huge scandal in baby food, which was
Yeah.
how we expanded then into the Chinese market after
Right.
that, because people
Okay.
wanted a safe option.
Yeah.
And, that just exploded, meaning that we literally then just, rolled out, let's say, the rest of Asia from there quite
Wow,
nicely.
really?
So,
Okay. So 2008 was the year. That's amazing.
I mean, we were doing some business in Asia before that time from,
Mm.
from the beginning. I was doing Taiwan, I was doing Vietnam. I got some business, I think, in Singapore.
Mm.
Mm, I'm not quite sure of the timelines on that, but once we'd started doing everything in China, it meant that we were able to produce products specifically that were specifically suited for the Asian markets,
Right.
also with other languages on the labels. So
Yeah.
it meant that we could do much better in Vietnam, especially. It meant that we could think about going into Korea,
Yeah.
think about expanding into other markets.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. That's interesting. Let's talk a bit about that European Asian crossover there, because that's useful for a lot of people listening, I think. So what are
Yeah.
the biggest misconceptions European brands have about distributors in China specifically?
I think on the one hand, if you actually ask companies who are not doing business in China, they will say to you that, they can't trust a Chinese distributor. But when it actually comes down to it, what often happens is that companies really overestimate the strategy capability that a distributor has.
Mm.
And maybe they give from day one full exclusivity to their Chinese partner without really, let's say, having a close hand on the business.
Right.
So you can't confuse importer with brand builder in China. And I mean, you shouldn't do it in any market, but especially not in a huge market like China. Probably would be the same in Brazil, yeah. Um, and I think that you have to be careful, because just having somebody who has relationships, it's important to have a distributor who has good relationships with the trade, but having good relationships doesn't necessarily equal them delivering a good performance for you and for your brand.
Mm.
So I think that it is really important, on the one hand, for you as a brand to take the time and to really get to know your distribution partner, and for you to also like keep quite close control over what they're actually going to be doing. Um, you know, you don't just want to let them off into the wild with a bunch of products that you've given them, and expect that they are going to build your brand to be a market leader in China. I think you've got to be more strategic about it than that,
Hmm.
and make sure that you do invest the time. You can't just do a little bit of China. You know, you have to go into it with quite a lot of resource, and especially on a time and personal perspective. You can't just say, well, we'll dip our toes into the water, as it were. You've got to go for it.
Okay, yeah, and I guess communication plays a big role there as well, like regularly going to China and visiting distributors and having meetings and managing expectations, things like that.
Absolutely. And I think that, especially post pandemic, lots of companies have really slashed their travel budgets.
Right.
And they've been very kind of, oh, well, we've got Zoom, or we've got whatever is your platform of choice. You know, we can just do like weekly catch up video calls. And
Hmm.
those are all fine, but they're not necessarily, they don't replace going there regularly and seeing what's actually happening on the ground. I
Sure.
mean, I'm sure everybody in the past has heard these like horror stories or of maybe trying to buy something in China for their business and realizing that the company that they were actually buying from wasn't the producer.
Right.
And I think it's a similar kind of thing with a distribution partner. You want to go and you want to check that they actually have a warehouse, and
Yeah.
that the warehouse is suitable for whatever products you're going to put in there. Because, you know, if you're looking at, I don't know, if you're looking at automotive spares, which is where I started out my career, you're going to need different warehousing conditions to if you're doing cleaning products, or you're doing food, or you're doing pharmaceuticals. You know, you've got different requirements. And I think you do have to go on the motto of, you know, trust is good, but control is even better,
Sure.
because that is how the Chinese system of certifications, etc., works. So if you don't yourself do those kind of audits, if you like, audit's a bit of a strong word to use, but if you don't use those audits of your own,
Yeah.
then your Chinese distributor is going to think that they're not important and that you don't care that much about
Right.
the way that they're doing things. And it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, I think from my side, it was always great to be able to go, and not just to spend all of the time in the importers or the distributors office, or doing store checks close to his office, because China is such a big place, but actually going out into the regions with the sales team
Mm.
and visiting the regional distributors. Because, you know, there's that question of, if you're working in a market as huge as China, you've got this very long supply chain that goes from your importer to maybe provincial distributors, and your provincial distributors maybe have sub distributors in certain towns and cities. So the product can be going through quite a lot of hands before it actually hits the shelf.
Yeah.
And if you're a brand who's looking to develop their own position in the Chinese market, then you need to be making sure that your brand messaging is being carried all along the line. I mean, you know, I'm sure as a child at some point you will have played the game that in the UK we call Chinese whispers, right? I think
You're
in
right.
the US they call
Yeah.
it telephone.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you give a message down the line, you don't want that message to get diluted or completely warped when you're
Yeah.
going from the brand at one end through to the consumer. You've got to try and make sure that that message is properly transported in a way that is suitable for a Chinese consumer.
Yeah, definitely. That completely makes sense, doesn't it? That's good. If I can push you here, Catherine, and to give me an example, if you can give me an example of a distributor relationship that looked perfect on paper but failed in reality. Do you have any of those?
Yes, I had one of my own actually.
Right.
And it was back, I'm going to say about 2009, 2010, when I was working with an importer on the second brand of the company that I was working with. And the importer on paper, it looked really good. It was a Chinese guy who had spent many years living in Germany. So he spoke quite good German. He said all of the things when he came to head office. He said all of the things that sounded good to top management, and he made all of these really nice presentations, calculating how he would get 0.01% of Chinese babies. This was back in 2009 or so, when there were a lot of Chinese babies. And how much business that would bring, and all of these nice things. And then actually on the ground, he had a sales guy who, how should I say, he was more of a trading kind of mentality. He wasn't a brand builder. And so all he was looking to do was literally to just push quantities of product. He wasn't interested in any of the branding messaging. He was literally just, if mothers asked him a question, or if he got questions from end consumers or from shop owners, he would more or less tell them what they wanted to hear.
Right.
Which obviously in infant formula is not, it's not a great way to be going about things. And he and his boss, who was like the joint venture partner of this guy who was based in Germany, they were really wanting to be trading things. They didn't really speak any English or German though, so there was no like direct communication between the team who were actually on the ground and me in head office, as it were. And in the end, it all just didn't work out. And this lady who was actually the, let's say, in charge of the company in Shanghai, she just decided she wasn't making enough money fast enough, and just left this guy who was based in Germany in the lurch. And he then moved and made a joint venture with actually somebody that I knew. And he told her that she wasn't allowed, that I wouldn't accept direct communication. And she herself also didn't really speak English, but she had an assistant who spoke very good English. And that was at the point when it all kind of started coming up, that this guy who was in Germany was kind of telling each side exactly what he thought that they needed to hear. He wasn't giving anybody the full picture of what was happening on the ground. He was just, I don't know, he was just telling us what he thought would keep us happy.
Yeah.
So
what did you learn from that experience? Do you think what would be a solution for that? How could people avoid that if they were facing the same thing?
I think definitely having somebody to help you. Because on the side of our main brand, our first brand, I had somebody who was effectively my person on the ground, who kind of would translate not just the linguistic side of things, but would also translate a lot of the cultural things and explain things to me. Don't worry, Catherine, we've got to sit and drink tea to, before, just remember, when we go into a meeting, we're going to drink tea for an hour or so before we start on the serious business. All those kind of little things that
Yeah.
actually, when you put them all together, then it does build up to making a big difference.
Yeah.
And, the company didn't feel that we needed his help on the second brand, because the guy who was talking to us from the company was based in Germany. And I think there was a lot of overestimation as to how integrated in Germany that he really was.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think, culture as well as language, as well as people's personalities and
Yes.
their capability, plays a big role, doesn't it? There's a much complex picture, isn't it?
There is. And I think that people underestimate, it's not just, there's no way that I can say to you, all Chinese people are like this.
Sure.
In the same way that I can't say all Brits are like that.
Sure.
It's always going to be a
Yeah.
very individual thing.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of companies go in to China without having really done any of their homework as to
Yes.
what they can expect culturally. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd been working in Taiwan for about 6 years, 7 years maybe, by the time I actually started working in mainland China.
Right.
So from a cultural perspective, it wasn't like everything was completely new to me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But obviously there were big differences.
Yeah. That's great. And that links to the next question I have here about due diligence. So what does good distributor due diligence actually look like beyond checking turnover and territory coverage?
I think a lot of the points I'm going to mention are quite generic here, because these are points that you also should be checking whatever market it is that you're going into and however your distribution partner looks. So I would say the ones that I look for, first of all, I look at what items does that person or that company have already in their portfolio. I want to know if they've got experience in the category, but not with direct I ideally don't want them to have direct competitors to me. So I might want them to have an adjacent product. Be that, if I'm in food, then I might want them to have, for example, if I'm doing sweet snacks, I might want them to have salty snacks, something like that. Then I would say what I'm also looking for, and some of those questions are ones that you ask when you make your first visit, are things like how is the sales team structured? What kind of incentive systems are they using? I'm also wanting to know, like I mentioned before, I also want, always on a first visit, I always want to see somebody's warehouse. People think I'm a bit weird, but when you've seen rats running around in a food warehouse, then
Sure.
you know why I ask the question. So yeah. And when you've seen also people warehousing stuff literally in private garages, then you can just see that they are not, let's say, they're not a big, serious company. So I think you have to go through all of these points. You have to check what are the channels that they are going to sell the products in, and are those the channels that you want your products to be sold in?
Mhm.
And are those the right channels for your products in China? Because you might find that even if you sell your products, for example, in a regular supermarket in your home market, you might be better off in some kind of specialized store if you're in China. It depends what you're selling, of course, but you have got to make sure that the way that the product is sold, that and that you're okay with that, and that it is the right one for the consumers. Because at the end of the day, your distributor or your importer is not your customer. They are your customer in the sense of you invoice them for the product, but they're not your customer if you're in consumer goods, because your customer is the person who finally consumes whatever it is that you're delivering.
Sure.
And I think that kind of B to B to C chain is something that you have to have in mind when you're doing this due diligence.
Yeah.
And I would say, finally, the main point for me is the question of data transparency, and it's one where Chinese companies often feel a little bit uncomfortable about. I will always ask a distributor that if I'm bringing in a beer or cookies or whatever it happens to be, that we sit down and make a value chain calculation together. And often companies don't want to tell you how much margin they're planning on taking or how the margin split looks. Also, there are those questions around, I'm going to want certain sets of reporting. And I expect that you as a distributor are going to understand that it's in our mutual interest for me to have as much information about the market as possible, not because I'm planning to set up my own entity in the very near future, but just because if I understand it better, then I can support you better.
Sure.
And I think that a lot of people, they kind of go in with a mentality of, it's really hard to find the right distribution partner. And it is really hard to find an excellent distribution partner. And so they sometimes just go with the first best one that kind of comes along.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking, I can save myself so much anxiety, so much stress, and so much time and money by just waiting and then going along with the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when it's important to do research and work with the right people, not just assume, like you said, assume that a certain distributor or a certain channel is best for you. It may not work for you. It might work for other companies, but not for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had the situation in the past that, for example, we had really good we started out with a focus on what was then tier 2. So we started out with a focus on, or some of it was even maybe, let's say, tier 3. Wuhan, Chengdu, Chongqing, Kunming, Hefei. Not your first. And we also did Guangzhou and Guangdong province because that was where the importer was based. And for a very, very long time, we had different structures in different provinces, depending on how the province worked. So Beijing, for example, was structured into specialized baby channels and a different distributor for general trade. Whereas Sichuan was split geographically, just straight down the middle. Chongqing was treated as its own separate little enclave.
Right.
And there were a couple of provinces that we also split according to online and offline. And it just was a very complex. Of course, it was a very complex system, but it just meant that we tried to really make sure that it worked, and so that we had the information as to what was going on. And we realized that some channels, your distribution partner in Zhejiang is going to have different strengths to the one who's working for you in Ningxia. And sometimes your channels that are successful are also going to vary depending. I mean, Zhejiang is a much richer province, obviously, than somewhere further west. So, that sometimes also is going to have an impact on how you want to sell your product. And I think that you have to be open to have those discussions with your importer, because otherwise it's not going to be, if you can't have very frank discussions in the beginning, then it's going to be difficult when you have actual problems, and problems occur in every relationship, don't they? So whenever you have those kind of questions, it's always better to be able to discuss things up front rather than when you're actually in a crisis.
Absolutely. That leads nicely on to the next one. So what are the early warning signs that a distributor relationship is drifting off track?
I guess the most obvious one is when you see that the reorders are not coming in the kind of frequency or the kind of regularity that you would be used to. So if you were used to them ordering like 2 containers every quarter and suddenly they're only ordering 1, or suddenly they're not ordering anything at all, that would certainly be like a very big red flag. I would say it starts, though, a little bit earlier than that. It often starts with them kind of almost hiding information from you, in the sense of monthly reports suddenly are not coming in with all of the details that you need, or they're not arriving at all. The other thing is when you then maybe you invite them to your annual event where you're bringing all of your distributors together, and suddenly you realize that for the second time, or the second event of some kind, that they've suddenly had to take care of their sick mother, or something's happened and they can't come, and they're just kind of, you get that feeling that they're just avoiding you.
Sure. Right.
What also sometimes happens is increased discounting. I mean, it shouldn't happen, but if you're in the food and beverage business, one of the first signs is that they're not focusing on your product, and that they're struggling in some way, shape, or form, is the fact that the product that's in their warehouse has really old shelf lives. Relative. When I say really old is always relative, because obviously a yogurt that's really old is only a couple of weeks old, as it were. Whereas if I'm talking about tins of some kind of pickles or something like that, then they have a much longer shelf life. But looking at shelf lives and realizing that it's a bit chaotic in the warehouse can be a good warning sign that they are not really putting the necessary focus and time into your products. And any kind of like permanent excuses, if you want to visit or you want to go to certain retailers and they always have a reason why you can't, that's the time when I personally will make a visit and literally just go and look at the shelf in whatever retailer it is and see what is actually going on. So I can tell you of times where retailers I've found one time in the Balkans, I won't say exactly where it was, but products that had expired a year earlier.
Wow.
I mean, one piece, but a year earlier. Or even, sometimes in some markets you go into the store and somebody will realize that you were actually from the brand, and they'll start telling you stuff. And of course, you've got to be careful with that, because sometimes people have other agendas behind what they're telling you. But, it is always a sign if you're starting to get lots of inquiries in from other people. If you have a market that was working really well, if China was working really well for you, and suddenly you start getting inquiries from other people saying, we want to be your partner in China, your present partner is doing a really bad job, it either means that that partner is doing a really good job and they're jealous and they want a piece of the cake, or they are genuinely doing a really bad job and you need to think about changing them, working together with them to improve things, or, worst case, I guess, withdrawing from the market. But that's usually definitely a last resort.
It's an in-person visit, but is there anything else apart from an in-person visit that you can think of to kind of get ready and prepare for the worst?
I mean, these days, of course, you can do lots of research online.
Sure.
If somebody is telling you they sell your product at 88 yuan, and you are looking in the online store of, for example, a baby store, and you see that in the baby store they're selling it at 178 yuan, or they're selling it at 45, then you know that that something is wrong somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, you can't compare, for example, Taobao with a high-end mall. So you have to be careful what you use as a comparison. But I think in all cases, it's that question, knowledge is power. The more information you have, the closer you are to a market, the better you can understand and the better you can read your distribution partner when they're starting to be a little bit evasive about what they're actually doing. So if they're not showing up to that weekly meeting, or if they are sending a junior always to that weekly Zoom meeting that you have,
Right. Yeah.
then it might be worth, having a little discussion.
Sure. Very good.
That sounds a bit, that sounds a bit teacher-like. That's probably too much of a, but in lots of cases, I think that brands are often too frightened to tell their importers how they want things done, and they often are just very laissez-faire in the way that they give their distribution rights to somebody. And at the end of the day, if I give you the rights to my brand, then that comes with rights, but it also comes with obligations towards me as a brand. And I think that that's something that both sides at sometimes conveniently ignore.
Yep. It all comes back to communication, doesn't it? Good communication. Yeah.
It does. And I mean, things do happen, and there are bad apples, both on the distribution side and on the brand side. And sometimes it's only one individual person who's actually the main contact point. If they are not a good communicator, or they can't communicate, or they have some kind of personal clash with the person on the other side of it, you can really ruin a distribution relationship without meaning to.
Yeah.
I saw it happen back at the beginning of my career, when the guy who was our contact moved in. He was our contact at a company in Estonia, and he sent us a letter on company letterhead, signed and stamped, saying that the company had been taken over. I don't remember the details, but the company somehow had been taken over and was now company Y instead of company X. No, he had
wow, really?
He had just changed jobs.
No way. Wow.
And effectively tried to take not only our brand, but 4 or 5 other big UK named brands in the automotive space with him. And we luckily found out before we'd made any shipments, because one of my colleagues from another company was in the country for a visit and realized that he purely by chance, his taxi took him past the other office, and he was just like, oh, but the lights are on, let's go in and talk to the guy.
No way. Okay.
And it was just like, oh.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Things happen. So I'm sure that there are people who've had similar situations in China with, one company disappearing and suddenly they're doing business with the next one, and they thought it was the same company all the time, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
But you do have to stay on top of things.
Definitely. Yeah. We're about 20 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions for Catherine, please do share in the chat there. I don't know how many people are in. Catherine, do you have a record there?
I don't see, actually. I just see that we are actually online.
Well, that's good to know, isn't it?
According to LinkedIn, it looks like we are online.
All right. So yeah, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat and I can ask later. But we can continue, Catherine. We've got a lot to do.
Oof.
Let's shift now to other countries. So how does working with a Korean distributor differ from working with a Chinese distributor or a Southeast Asian one?
Good question. Very good question. I think one of the main things that brands really, really need to remember is the fact that Asia is not a country, in the same way that Europe is not a country,
Mm.
and in the same way that if you were US based, you also wouldn't expect a company in New York to work in exactly the same way as a company in California or in Florida, something like that. And I think that, and of course, those differences are much larger in Asia, in the same way that they can be quite large in Europe as well. So I think that what we have to really remember is that each nation within Asia, yes, there are some kinds of general similarities in certain things, but in many ways that they are very much their own market. If you work with Koreans, Koreans often look to North America much more than, for example, Chinese do, partly because historically they've been close from a defense perspective. And I often find that Korean companies they're definitely not the same as Japanese companies, but they often have a certain Japanese influence into their culture compared to, for example, Chinese. I mean, I find that Koreans can be very down to earth, very maybe a little bit less soft, if you like, than if you deal with East Asian partners. There's not so much in business, at least, there's often not so much smiling and careful discussions. And that's probably a question of negotiation style. And I know that people tend to be much more formal than they are if you go into, for example, a company in Indonesia or in Thailand, where things are a little bit more, the hierarchy is more of a, let's say, a steel hand in a velvet glove. And if you're in Korea, you tend to see it a little bit more.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean that in a bad way, because working in Korea is one of my favorite markets to do business with, but it feels much more down to earth. Let's get on with doing business. And it's quite, I would say it's sometimes easier to do business with as a European. It's sometimes
Really?
easier to do business with Koreans than with, for example, Southeast Asians or with Chinese. And maybe that's because a lot of Koreans have studied abroad. Those
Right.
who are running, who are running companies, a lot of people have studied abroad, or they've had, at least a year of high school abroad.
Yeah.
Something like that. But obviously, from a cultural perspective, Korea is its own thing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And historically, they also are very wary of as everybody is in the rest of Asia, they're very wary of China, because having such a huge neighbor is always something that puts you on your guard, however your political stance may be.
Yeah.
And I think everybody has border disputes with China, don't they?
Perhaps. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's move on swiftly, Catherine. What mistakes do brands make in the first 12 months after appointing a distributor?
They assume that delivering product into a market means that you've sold product.
Right.
And it doesn't. So if you're working in a new market, you need to, I would say, make an agreement with your distribution partner about the activities that partner should be doing, rather than the amount that they should be selling. Because you don't want to encourage the new distributor, you don't want them to be dumping your product into the market at any price just to generate sales. You want them to be taking the right steps to build the foundation for your brand. And you can't assume that momentum will build itself. So that means that in the first year, you have to, as a brand, invest in both market visits, but also in training for the team of that distributor. It's a little bit like politicians, and they say, you know, that first 100 days or whatever it is, you really do need to agree with a new distributor what steps they're going to take, what activity KPIs they need to meet, and that they know that for the first period, you're expecting them to build the foundation for fast track sales after that. You're not expecting them to have top listings from day one. Of course, it would be nice, but it's not realistic to expect that that is going to work. And I think you have to be very clear together with your distribution partner about how success looks in that first year of business. So if you can say to them, look, we're entering into this market from zero. We would like you in the first month, or even before you get your first container, we want you to send over your head of sales and your brand manager, product manager, however you structure your business, to us for training on the product. And they will then train the rest of the team.
Mm.
You know, we will do the registrations, product registrations, and so on. We will do that together. And we want you in the first month, we want you to be making visits to so many key accounts to try to get listings. We want you to be having this kind of meeting. Maybe, you know, maybe you need some kind of specialist support from I don't know, if you're selling toothpaste, maybe you want to go to the dentist association and to start building a team who's going to visit dentists, that kind of thing, that are all based on activities, and there's no reason why your distributor can't do that. Whereas sales tends to be a little bit out of their control. You know, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be focusing on trying to sell, but they should be doing the activities that lead to it, and your focus should be there rather than purely looking at the numbers and beating them over the head with a stick if they don't make the numbers, but they've been doing all of the right activities. So I think it's something that you have to stay very, very close to. For the Chinese market, for example, for me, when I was in corporate, when I was delivering a brand in the first year, I wanted to have weekly sales out, and that was their sales out. So I wasn't so much interested in how much product had I shipped, but I wanted to know what were their sales out, how much stock did they have, and I was keeping a really close eye on that and making sure that they reordered at the right times and making sure that they understood as much as possible about how our processes worked.
Right.
And I think that is it lays a really strong foundation for the future. And none of this kind of, I might offend a couple of people with this, none of this kind of, oh, well, they don't have time, they're only a small company, they can't send, I don't want them wasting their time sending me sales reports. No, I want to know, what have you been doing?
Yeah.
What are the results of it?
Yeah.
And what can we do together? How can I help you? If, you know, and if you're too small and not able to send me reports of what you've actually been doing in a market and what you've achieved or where you've hit problems, then you're probably not the right distributor for me.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that brands are too lax on this. I'm starting to get ranty now.
No, you're right though, having the right processes, systems and the foundation, and then managing expectations, communication, that's the foundation, isn't it? And if you don't have that, you're just assuming and guessing and then randomly guessing, and that leads to nothing really, doesn't it? So yeah, you're dead right.
It happens all the time. That is the sad thing about it. And
sure.
And often, you know, those expectations, that first 12 months of that very close relationship is when you also kind of rub off the corners, if you like, of each other's cultural expectations of the other side.
Yeah.
I think that is you just can't underestimate how important that is for the long-term success.
Yep.
Because if your back office team, if you as a brand, your back office team are thinking, oh, the Egyptians, they're always asking for this, or the Koreans are always asking for this, and they're so unreasonable. They probably need that for their, they probably need that for their authorities, or they need that information in order to get listed in key accounts. And there are all kinds of small things that seem like a lot of unnecessary work to the brand owner, but actually are what moves the brand forward and accelerates it going forward. So
Yep. No, that's great. It's good advice. A couple more questions and then a final question for you, Catherine. So how does distributor management differ between food and beverage versus personal care or baby categories?
I think, for example, food and beverage compared, or baby to some extent, if you're talking about the kind of pouches or weaning type products that babies eat every day, those are very much fast moving consumer goods. Whereas personal care or baby things like bottles or, breast pumps, all of those kind of things, they could be packaged consumer goods, but they're not that fast moving, because you don't need a bottle of shampoo every week in the same way that you need to replace your regular kind of eggs and meat and that kind of thing. I would say the other thing, so that makes it brings in a completely different dynamic. You also tend not to have so much shelf life pressure on personal care products as you do on food and beverage. And that takes quite a lot of discussion out of the relationship. So, of course, whatever products you have, there are going to be different educational requirements for it. But I do feel that if you're working with food and beverage, then it's often so fast paced, because when you've delivered something from Europe to Asia, you're really struggling to manage that shelf life. So it really needs somebody who is excellent with lots of very moving pieces and lots of uncertainty. It's also a huge financial commitment to, to import products. And so sometimes those regulatory questions or the shelf life questions, they really make or break your relationship. And I think that regulatory hurdles are usually for personal care, they're completely different. They often take a lot longer than they do for regular food and drink. Baby is a different ball game altogether if we're talking about infant formula, but because that's almost like pharmaceutical. But personal care or cleaning products, for example, is maybe like a 12 to 18 months registration process.
Wow.
Whereas if you're looking at registering something like juice, or, maybe you're bringing in you're bringing in chips or cookies or something like that, then you don't have such a high hurdle to overcome in terms of registration and that kind of thing. And you also don't necessarily need to educate your consumers or your sales team about how to sell it. A chocolate chip cookie is much easier to sell than a high-end snail slime.
Finish your sentence, please.
So, I think that's also a difference. And I guess the other difference is that question of how the retailer power dynamics work out. Because if you're selling, and there it also depends very much, are you selling Head and Shoulders kind of P&G mass market personal care, or are you selling high end? We're going to sell this, high end, we're going to sell this for €50 a piece or even more. then of course your sales channels are going to be different.
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that, you know, you're going to have to manage your distributors and select your distributors completely differently, because
Yeah.
the ones who sell, if you like, Johnson and Johnson baby care are going to be looking at the very much at the supermarket type channels.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at a brand, if you're looking at something which is, I'm trying to, and of course I can't think of anything. If you're looking at a brand which is really expensive, if you're looking at Shiseido or something like that, then you're probably going to be looking at specialty retail channels rather than, and you're going to be looking more at the kind of, in Asia, you're going to be looking at somewhere like Olive Young, maybe Sephora, those kind of channels, rather than just putting it in Walmart on the shelf or
Yeah.
putting it in Olay on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that luxury brands are usually very good at, and mass market, like bottom end mass market brands, are usually very good at. The problem comes when you've got an imported brand who is maybe mass market in their home market, but because of the price positioning, they're perceived as being more luxury in an Asian market,
Right.
potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when it starts to get more difficult, because
Mm.
you maybe as a brand don't have that experience of selling in the channel that you're now expected to be on the shelf of. And I
Right.
think that is where you then need a distributor who really has that applicable experience, who can guide you, whilst at the same time you're still saying to them, these are the guardrails that we need to have for our brand and for our messaging.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. Much more complicated.
Yeah, I always find that personal care, and especially if we turn it to luxury cosmetics and those kind of things, that starts to get, for me at least, much more complicated, because it tends to be much more trend driven than, you know, whether you're going to sell salt and vinegar or cheese and onion crisps.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Good. I'm just conscious of the time here, Catherine. I'd like to ask you a couple more questions, if that's all right. Do we have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to decide. We have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure. Yes. So yeah, this is a good one. Knowing what you do now, which advice would you give to your younger self starting out on your international journey? And which resources do you wish you had had at that time?
Oh, which resources do I wish I'd had? That is the very easiest one.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure that anybody of my age who started out, I'm trying to think. I think we did have a mobile phone in the company by the time
All right.
time, and it was one of those kind of things that the managers were given it if they went to trade shows and things.
Okay. Wow.
Um,
Just one.
but there was just one, and I didn't actually have a mobile phone until, I'm going to say, 2001. And even then it was a company one. So I would have loved to have had a smartphone, with internet connection
Yes.
and all of the things that we have today. Because when I sit and think about doing long business trips into weird and wonderful places, sometimes for up to a month, and not having to, because I was doing emerging markets, so, you know, Africa and places, and having to like book a phone call to the office a couple of days in advance, and for long distance calls to make sure that you've got the connection and all those kind of things. It would have been so much easier if we talked about what do I wish I could tell my younger self. I think I would tell my younger self to not worry so much, and
Okay.
that to go out there and to network and to meet as many people as possible, and not to always feel that I had to be grateful for the breadcrumbs that, you know, certain employers or certain people were offering to me. I'm not saying that I would wish to have changed my career trajectory, because I certainly wouldn't, but I wish that I'd been more confident about talking to other people and more confident in my own abilities.
That's great. That's great advice for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like now with the, these new visa-free arrangements to China, people can get out there, and I can see you're very excited about it.
Yeah,
Me too.
me too. It's so good.
Get out there and network, right?
I want it to be like a little Muppet, like, yeah,
Sure.
around the house.
Good. And just one final question here. So just tell us, what kind of services do you offer, and who should reach out to you?
Okay, so I work with mostly medium-sized or small to medium-sized companies in the consumer goods space who are looking to enter into APAC markets. And as you may have realized from this conversation today, I especially love working with China. I love working with Korea and with Southeast Asia, but there are other markets out there as well where I have quite a breadth of experience, and I am always excited to talk to people who are looking to get started on their international journey. So I can help with partner search, with export strategy. I probably should have said those in the other order, but yeah. I also offer, if somebody is looking to get into international sales and they're looking for or they're inexperienced and their boss doesn't have time to coach them, I do also offer one-on-one coachings on a very limited basis if anybody's interested in help with how to manage their distribution partners, because they can sometimes be a bit difficult.
Perfect. And also, I should say, you've got a great LinkedIn. You post every day, which is great, and your YouTube channel as well. You've got loads of videos on there. So if anyone wants to go and check anything else out, there's obviously like checklists and loads of good resources that can help people, expand into other markets. So yeah, check those
lots
out.
of good stuff. Lots of free stuff out there.
Yes.
Free advice.
Yep.
Cool.
Any questions? Are there any questions or not?
No, it seems not. Either that or nobody's watching us today.
That's all right. We've got the video recording, haven't we?
We have a video recording, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Catherine. That's amazing. It's been very, very good, and a lot of information there, and a lot of useful advice and practical advice as well that people can act on now and get ahead for this year, right?
Indeed. And
yes.
I'm sure I would be more than happy to help you take your brand into Asia this year.
The year of the fire horse. It's the year, isn't it?
It is the year of the horse. We need to move forward with energy.
Exactly.
And go into the adventure.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a perfect time, isn't it?
I think it is. So, yeah.
Great. Well, Catherine, good. I hope that was useful. Thank you again for sharing your experiences, and check out the other shows as well. I heard episode 39 is really good.
Yeah, I seem to remember that was a good conversation as well. Yeah.
But there's a lot. So many different kinds of people have been on your show and shared a lot of different advice and experiences. So check those out as well.
Yeah. And James, I would like to say thank you to you for taking over the role of host today.
I'm not sure I wasn't as good as you, Catherine.
To be cross-questioned by somebody else and to be on the other end of the
oh no, that's fine, you're welcome. But yeah, you're more natural than I am for sure. But yeah, we should do it again sometime.